Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special bonus episode of Talk More Talk, a Solos Beatle video cast. And we've got a very special guest here with us today. We'll get to him in 1 second, but it's me, Tom Hunyadi from Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. We also got with us Ken Michaels from Every Little Thing and Things We Said Today. And we also got the Queen, Kid O'Toole from Toppermost of the Poppermost podcast for celebrating all things charts throughout the Beatles' existence as a group. And we, as you can see here, we are joined by legendary guitar player Laurence Juber, who is going to help us celebrate the 45th anniversary of a special song that we all know and love very much. And we're talking about a song from this album. It's called Rainbow Connection. Laurence Juber, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks. It's
Good.
strange. Another one of those strange kind of nexuses of pop culture where
Mm,
I find myself kind of connecting kind of Beatles slash Wings or Beatles adjacent
right,
and something else, whether it would be Gilligan's Island, Brady Bunch, or in this case, Paul Williams
right.
and
Paul Williams.
Paul Williams.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about Paul Williams in a second, but before we get started with that, kind of let everybody know around 78, like right before you're joining Wings, you're mainly a sessions musician at
Yeah,
that time, correct?
I was a studio musician in London
Hmm.
and just played with an awful lot of people. And I didn't do a lot of movie or TV work. That really came later when I moved to LA. But I did play on The Spy Who Loved Me.
Right,
So I
right,
got to play the actual James Bond theme, as opposed to the Live and Let Die James Bond theme. Yeah.
right. Now, when the people follow your career, they know that you've had a lot of history with Paul Williams. Talk about the first time you met him, and were you aware of his work prior to that?
Well, I was certainly aware of his work because I was a Carpenter's fan. In
Mm,
fact, when I was
yeah.
breaking into studio work right after college, I would play various kind of bands, some society bands, some dance bands around London. And if you recall the Good Night Tonight video, that we
Mm,
were on stage at the Hammersmith, what was then the Hammersmith Palais, with a revolving stage. And I used to
mm,
play there. I guess I was probably 19 or 20 at the time. No, maybe a bit older. But with Ken McIntosh's band, which was like, kind of a rhythm section and a horn section. And at the end of our set, the stage would revolve and another band would come on. But we would always be doing tunes that were like top 20 songs. And so, Carpenters um, were part of that repertoire. And my
mm.
favorite was Goodbye to Love because it had a really cool, almost kind of Clapton-esque solo at the end. And I had learned it, but the band leader thought I was sight reading it. I mean, it was kind of, it was a bit of a fake. Um, but it's funny because just as a side note, many years later, and actually a um, rainbow connection with this that I was worked on a version of Get Together in 1988 with Jesse Colin Young for a movie called 1969. And the
Mm,
producer of that, Michael James Jackson, was the producer at A&M that always worked with Paul, and that was how I actually got introduced to Paul Williams. But
mm,
the when we were mixing, I went into the mixing session for that song, and look it up because it's a very cool version of Get Together. It's quite unlike the Youngbloods version. But the mixing engineer was Tony Peluso, who was the guitarist with the Carpenters. And
oh,
I
wow.
expressed to him how much I loved his solo on that. And he was kind of a little sheepish about it because he felt like he was rushing. Uh, it's a little like Clapton with the Crossroads solo, where he got lost,
Mm,
but it actually was the coolest thing in guitar history. It's like when you do these things, you never really know what, kind of how people are going to truly kind of
mhm.
enjoy them, accept them, whatever. But anyway, um, so through Michael James Jackson, who I had been working some sessions with, and he produced a band called Checkered Past, which I wrote for, which was the rhythm section from Blondie and Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols and Tony Sales. It was one of those
Mm.
LA 1984 things. But he hired me to play on the songs for Ishtar, for the movie
Hmm.
Ishtar, which
Oh,
Paul
sure.
Williams had written.
Yeah.
And we made an album that would have been released with of the songs of these really good but bad songs that Paul Williams had written for the movie. And if you know, and this has become kind of a cult movie. I mean, the critics hate it,
Right.
but there's this whole
Yes.
subculture of people who actually love the movie and the songs. Um, and so that was the first time I worked with Paul. And we spent
Mm.
a great deal of time in the studio. And Jim Keltner played drums, Abe Laboriel was on bass.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Wow.
Waddy Wachtel was the other guitar player. It was a cool studio band, but the music was never released.
Huh.
Wow.
So,
You when
but that's
when
typical of
when
Hollywood.
we, gotcha. When we had you on my other show, Two Legs, we were casually having a conversation about, what else you were doing besides just playing with Wings, and then you had just out of the blue said you had played, on the Rainbow Connection, and it kind of, at first, it kind of just like surprised me because I wasn't expecting that. And then I always kind of wanted to have this extra chat with you, specifically about just that song because it was, it's part of my childhood, and I'm sure it's Kit's
Sure.
childhood, and Ken knows the song as well. Loved the movie, but you did not play on the original, or is that you on the
No, I'm
original?
not. No, I'm not on the original because that was before I
Okay.
got to LA. In fact, and
Mm,
I don't think there were a lot of studio guitar players playing on movies in that
right.
part of the 70s. But I remember being in LA. I think it was I forget exactly when it was, but calling up Jeff Baxter and saying that him saying that he couldn't talk for very long because he was on his way to a session. And I said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's
Mm.
Steely Dan or something. So, the Muppets. The fact is, you can be the hippest musician,
Right.
I mean, my first session when I got to LA was for a Herbie the Love Bug movie. I mean, it's like you just never know.
Wow.
And the fact is, you look at the list of credits whether it's mine or any of the other studio guitar players, and it's just a very broad range, and that was
Right.
part of what got me into Wings was the fact that I was versatile and I could play any kind of style. So what happened with Rainbow Connection was that we did an album for Paul Williams that was for a Japanese release, um,
Mm.
which was released in 1997. So I guess we recorded it kind of somewhere around 95, 96. Um, and it was because the Carpenters had been huge in Japan, and Paul was popular, that we did a number of his songs that were either hits for the Carpenters or hits in some other way. The album's called Back to Love Again, and we
Right.
did Rainbow Connection for that, but we didn't do it, with the Kermit banjo style of doing it. It was
Mm.
more,
Yeah.
Mm.
more evolved kind of arrangement. Um, and that was the first time that I'd recorded it with him. Um,
Okay.
Actually was kind of a cool album. I think eventually it was released in the US, but um, these things come and go. So,
Right.
but there was that, and then the second time we did it, I had done I think 2002, somewhere around there, for AIX Records, was a record label here in LA that was doing high resolution digital recordings that were being released in DVD audio format. So you
Mm.
could have video on screen, but the idea was that it was like surround sound, high resolution audio, way before Dolby Atmos
Gotcha.
or any of that stuff.
Right.
And we did a record an album with Paul called "I'm Going Back There Someday."
Hmm.
And one of the tunes we did was Rainbow Connection, except this time we did it with Willie Nelson and the Great
Right.
Dog. So we had a Muppet, and you forget that you're dealing with a puppet. I mean, it becomes real. And then And
Right.
Willie Nelson, I felt like I was like 10 feet tall because, Paul Williams is not tall, Willie Nelson is not tall, and the great Gonzo is a puppet. Um, and that was a very different kind of version of it. But I played
Right.
guitar. Um,
Play guitar. Right.
yeah.
Queen, Kit.
Yeah, let me go back to the first time
Right.
that you recorded Rainbow Connection with Paul Williams, because I'd never heard that version,
Hmm.
and as you said, it's a different, very different version. Yeah, no banjo,
Right.
and of course, as Tom said, I mean this song is so meaningful to our generation. I mean, when Tom told me that you had, you know, played different versions, I mean, I think we both teared up when we were talking about this song. That's how much this means to us. But anyway, I really loved the '97 rendition. Were you were you involved in the rearrangement of it, or how did this
Only to
come
the
about?
extent that, with those kind of sessions, I mean, you're in the studio together coming up with parts.
Hmm.
And I was a little disappointed because I had nailed kind of a finger picking acoustic guitar part to kind
Mm.
of lead it with, but that was not the direction they were going. It was they used a keyboard texture to kick it off. Um, but but typically, unless there's an arranger, an actual arranger on the session who's handing out the parts and you're playing what they've arranged, that everybody's listening and figuring out, kind of how their parts are going to work together. And there's some communication with the producer or with the artist as to how it all kind of once it feels right, it feels right. Um,
Mm.
so that was really the shape of that. Um, in that particular context, with that particular production environment, I was really not there as an arranger. I was there as a guitar player. I mean, there's
Right,
plenty of times
Mm.
where I'm producing or arranging and playing or however. Yeah.
right. And so, what was your approach then, as a guitarist,
Just,
with that?
just to make it feel good.
Mhm.
Can't
Yep.
really go wrong with a song like that. And then it's
Mhm.
just finding the right place, whether you're finger picking or strumming or however it works.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and yeah, what is your opinion of the song? Because I mean, when you said it feels, it feels good, and certainly that's how Tom and I and our generation, that's how. But as a musician, what is it about that song that you think is so effective?
It's just a beautiful song and it,
Mhm.
it captures such emotion and it's transcendent, you know.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
kind of the nature of these things is is the is really that you get sucked into its reality and you forget that you're listening to a song because it's an anthem.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yep,
Mm.
absolutely. And I think too, Paul's lyrics, I mean, I think what we responded to as well is, they're not, I mean, they're not speaking down to us, when we were children. I mean, they are,
Mm.
they're kind of speaking to the child
Well, because
within all of us.
Paul has that kind of Peter Panish kind of, the fact that, I mean, he's
Mm.
well into his 80s now and, it's still,
Yeah.
it's just got vitality. But, but we mustn't forget Kenny Asher
Yes.
Yes, that's
because,
right.
the musical component of that, I mean, and it was kind of cool because I played one time, some years ago, I played a Iridium in New York and Paul came and joined me for an encore, but he brought Kenny Asher with him. So I got to meet Kenny.
Mm.
Um, um, but yeah, it's just, it's one of those songs. And of course, because of the Muppet connection, it just has such reach. It's so, broad. Um, and it came out of that 70s era where Paul's songwriting was just so fertile.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. It was. Well,
Gotcha.
and I was thrilled. This was one more question before I pass it on to Ken. I was thrilled going fast forwarding to 2005 when you did the other I'm going back there someday that
Mhm.
you also played on
Yeah.
I'm going to go back there someday. That's one of my other favorite songs from
Mm.
Muppet Movie. I just think that is a gorgeous, gorgeous song. And I just and on top of that, the duet with Gonzo, and you mentioned that
Yeah.
that there was
Willie
Gonzo right
Nelson
in the
and the
studio.
great Gonzo and
The
Paul.
Great Gonzo, what was that like?
It was very cool because there was just this moment where we're on because we were on a stage. It wasn't a studio. Those recordings were done in the Zipper Auditorium, which is part of the Colburn School downtown LA. So it's a concert hall. So we're on a concert stage with good acoustics and no PA or anything. We're not doing a performance for an audience. We're just playing for the microphone and just being set up with Paul. And in the video, you can see I'm kind of right behind Paul.
Hey,
Yes.
Paul. Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just it's fun. I mean, sometimes you do some sessions can just be hard. Just hard work because there's a lot of notes, or there's a lot of pressure, or whatever. But doing stuff like that is just there's a joy to it.
Yeah. What was your
Hmm.
approach to playing that? Because it was hard. I was trying to see your finger work in that, and of course, it was hard
That
to
was
see
just
exactly behind him.
yeah. I mean, you play guitar. It's like it's
Mhm.
just if the texture is such that it needs nothing more than strumming, then that's what I'm going to do. If there's room, you look for the spots where you can kind of make a little interjection.
Hmm.
Because I've always, as a studio musician, I've always tried to put a little bit of my personality into things.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh,
If I
thank
can
you.
get
Just
away with it.
wonderful.
Yeah. Ken?
Just to clear things up on the actual Muppet movie soundtrack, what are you playing on?
On the 20,
11.
2011.
I'm playing
Yeah.
on some of the Brett McKenzie songs I played on. But I couldn't tell you what they were. But I remember distinctly because we did a couple of sessions. And we're on the session, and up comes the music for Rainbow Connection, and I pull out my banjo, which is a 1927 Vega 5-string.
Wow.
And
Hmm.
the first note of music is a low A, which doesn't exist on a 5-string banjo.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Lowest note on a 5-string banjo is a D. So 6-string banjo, which is basically
Ah.
our neck on a banjo body. And I double checked with the arranger. I wanted to make sure that that was actually me because it sounded like me. And it was, yeah, and it's very prominent too, because of course, it's Kermit. It's Kermit
Right.
playing it.
Yeah.
So, because that's such a distinctive thing for Kermit with the banjo.
Yeah.
I'm
So
glad
I did my Kermit banjo part.
You nailed it.
brought up Kenny Asher, and I'm glad that you mentioned him because for Beatle fans, since the Mind Games box set has just been released, he plays on the album playing keyboards, and he also plays on John Lennon's next album, Walls and Bridges, and he played on Rock and Roll, the following album.
Hmm.
As did Jonathan Cobert played on the Rock and Roll album.
Okay,
He's the keyboard player on Stand By Me.
right. He's the one that's
Hmm.
appeared at the Fest for Beatle fans.
Yeah, and he made a very fine contribution to Billy J. Kramer's latest album.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about
As
it because I've been listening to the new album, and it sounds it's like a 60s album for today.
Yeah,
It's contemporary sounding, and I know that you co-produced it. I
yeah.
mean, not to take a detour from Paul Williams, we'll get back to that. But what was it like to work with Billy? And you also had Steve Holly on the one song, which was the
Oh,
Brian.
it's on half the album,
I
not
thought
just
you
one song.
played on the Brian Epstein tribute song.
Yeah, he played on that, but um, he what happened was we all got invitations to Billy's 80th birthday party
Hmm.
being held in Studio 2. And the next 2 days had been booked to make the record with him. And I volunteered because I had, the first concert I ever saw was Billy J. Kramer.
Wow.
With
Oh,
Jerry the
wow.
Pacemakers and Billy J. Kramer in July of 1963. I hadn't even started playing guitar at that point. And then I worked with Billy in 1977 in London on a song called San Diego. He put out a single, and when I was a session player. And so he and I had kind of bonded, and we'd met at Beatles Fests over the years and played a little bit together. But I said to Billy, well, who's producing this record? And he said, well, nobody right now. And I said, well, I'll volunteer. It was kind of like my birthday, my 80th birthday present to Billy. And then Jeff Perholtz from the Newbies, who's Billy's musical director, got involved. So I said to Jeff, well, let's, split the production duties between us. And then we had 2 days, one of which we had one particular group of musicians. And then on the second day, we had Steve Holley, we had Alan Thompson on bass from, who is Martin Barr's bass player, who also was John Martin's bass player and is with Pentangle. So very, very English style of bass playing. And then we had Jeff Allen Ross on keyboards and Jonathan Colbert on keyboards. And I had already pre-laid a lot of my guitar stuff because I knew that we weren't going to have enough time to do everything from scratch. So I had arranged, I think I arranged like 5 or 6 of the songs on the album. And played on almost everything. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 songs I didn't play on, but I was still, and I was mixing. I mixed much of that record too.
Right.
So, so it was very much a hands-on thing, but the songs were. I didn't have much say in the choice of the songs, but there were a couple of songs that I did some radical rearrangements of. One was a song of Billy's, Emma, which is a very sweet ballad. And then there was another one called Dancing Shoes that was had been done as kind of like a country waltz, and I turned it into something more of an R&B kind of groove.
Okay. Well, production is stellar. It's just it's so crisp and mixed so well, all the instrumentation.
I mean, we literally, Jeff and I were mixing the album ourselves because we didn't have enough budget to hire a mixing engineer. I've mixed enough records to know what I'm doing. And that goes back to being in Wings and actually, watching Phil McDonald and Jeff Emmerich and, these great engineers at work. I just learned some of the ropes, as it were.
You had good teachers.
Well, when you're watching, you have to be a good student too. You have to.
Yes, of course.
Another album that I can recommend, just while we're on the subject of kind of other things, is the T-Bear record, The Way of the World, on Quarto Valley Records. T-Bear is an old friend. Steve Holley and I jammed with him at JP's in Manhattan in like 1979 when we were there promoting the Back to the Egg record, and I'd stayed friendly with Richard T-Bear over the years, and he kind of had a bit of a career resurgence some 5 years ago, and I played on a record he did. And then Tony Bronigal, who's a great drummer and blues producer, he and I co-produced this T-Bear record that came out a few months ago. And I did some co-writing and did a lot of arranging, and I didn't mix the record, but I did, recorded most of it. And that's a really interesting record that's been getting a lot of good reviews too. So,
What's the name?
And then the one album that I had very little to do with, other than actually kind of being the dad of the artist, is our daughter Ilse has a record out called From the Valley, on Elektra Records, on Parlophone Records in the UK.
Oh, very cool.
How cool is that? That my daughter is on the Beatles record label.
Oh, that's great.
And that's a remarkable record because she's a successful songwriter. I mean, she's written some big hits, over the last few years. You know, Panic at the Disco, High Hopes, Shawn Mendes,
Right.
Wow.
Miley Cyrus, Mark Ronson, Nothing Breaks Like a Heart.
My goodness.
Jeff
Wow.
Did you
Allen
guess?
calling me, but he can wait. I'll tell you.
Did you guess on her record?
I'm on one track. I played rhythm guitar on a track called Yellow Roses. But
Hmm.
she works with a producer. She's been associated, you know, Bon Iver, you know, Justin.
Sure.
Yeah, well,
Hmm.
Justin's on 3 tracks on Ilse's album. She's also part of his the Big Red Machine ensemble that they have as this offshoot of Bon Iver. And her co-producer on the record is part of that team too. So there's kind of commercial pop, but with the kind of progressive texture, and really with a kind of a contemporary folk kind of vibe about it.
Very cool. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so those are my sonic recommendations, and of course
Oh, that's great.
my album, A Day in My Life.
Yes.
Knowing we were going to be at Abbey Road, I booked the day before. Happily, I was able to get the studio and just sat there all day and played Beatle tunes, playing into microphones that were used on Beatle records,
Uh-huh.
and with the intention of not doing CDs, but just doing vinyl and streaming. And then
Mm.
said, but please do CDs. So we've got CDs too.
Okay. Let me just go back a few seconds because I was asking about Ilse's album. Is that available in the US or is that a
Oh
UK?
yeah, no, it's a US release, and it's on all the streamers.
Yeah.
The first single was called No California, which got a lot of airplay on the Spectrum on Sirius.
Okay.
Mm.
And what was the name of that
The
T-Bear?
album is called From the Valley,
That's Ilse's. Okay.
Ilse's, and then the T-Bear record is The Way of the World.
The Way of the World. Okay.
World. Mm.
When it came to Billy J's album, did he have the intention of trying to make it sound like 60 songs, but with a very
Well, I think that was part of it, and part of my job was to steer it away into a more contemporary sound.
Mhm.
Some of the songs they really wanted to do in a very 60s kind of vibe. I mean, like there's one song they did with the Jukebox Beatles from Puerto Rico because they wanted that kind of, you know, that kind of sound to it. But for me, it was like it wasn't really kind of going for any particular era
Right.
as much as it was just making a good sounding record and having it, you know, having it groove and having it work for Billy's voice.
Right.
And the outcome of it, I thought, you know, I thought it turned out really quite well. And there's some good videos too, because Jeff Perholtz, the co-producer, is also a videographer, and they got some really cool drone footage in Liverpool right around Beatle Week last year, and so the video for I Couldn't Have Done It Without You was you know, has some cool Liverpool footage there. Now that song, Mark Hudson and Gary Burr wrote that song, and Mark,
Mhm.
I got an email from Mark, rather a text message from Mark saying, "Hey, written a song for Billy," and it was just such a cool song, and I said, you know, Billy, you have to do this, and I basically took the demo and just made it a record.
Mm. It's a great song. And I love the video because it goes from black and white to color.
Yeah.
You know, old footage in black and white to today, or, you know, or more recent in color. So it's really well.
And then the Sofa Media were very kind to allow us to use a little bit of Billy's appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, his debut on the Ed Sullivan Show. And the record, actually, the album was released on the anniversary of Billy's debut on Sullivan.
Hmm.
So, because there was a sense, you know, this is Billy going back to Abbey Road. You know, there's this feeling that all, you know, 60 years had elapsed and he still has the vitality as a singer. He still, you know, he doesn't doesn't look his age.
Right. And
Hmm.
vocally, he sounds great. He still sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's still got the pipes. Now, the
Mm.
album I wanted to make with him, before I got handed basically all the songs, I wanted to make a rockabilly record with him.
Oh, that would have been cool.
And I still would like to see that happen. In fact, at the Beatles Fest in New Jersey, not in New York, when we did it at the TWA Hotel.
Yep.
We did Billy's set, and then, as the evening progressed, playing with Liverpool and Steve Holly and Greg Bissonette are playing drums. I mean, it was the coolest thing, and I see Billy on the side of the stage, and we pulled him back up, and he just said key of A, and he counted it in and launched into a whole bunch of rock and roll songs. And it's like, that's the real Billy J. Kramer.
Yeah.
It's like underneath that, his pop stuff is basically just channeling his inner rockabilly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I've seen Billy in concert, he always does a set where he does a lot of 50s.
Yeah.
A whole string of 50 songs that are favorites of his.
Yeah.
All right. Back to Tom.
All right, thank you. Well, getting back to the Muppet soundtrack from 2011, was the Rainbow Connection the only song you performed on, or did you do
No,
others
I
as
played
well?
on some other stuff, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
Okay.
The thing about it is you walk out of the studio and it's like, it's all gone.
Mm.
Song titles or whatever. But Rainbow Connection was one that stuck with me because it's an anthem and because it required
Right.
something out of the ordinary in terms of the 6-string banjo.
Right, gotcha. Now, have you ever performed that live by yourself? And can we get you to perform it at Beatle Fest in August?
Ah, nice going, Tom.
An interesting one. Yeah, I mean, I could probably do it if Mark Lapidus gives me enough time. There's a lot of guests.
Yeah.
Next one. So.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. But
Yeah.
but you have never played it in concert before
No,
by yourself?
no,
wow.
I don't have
Okay.
a solo arrangement of it. I could probably do one, but
Mm-hmm.
Oh, please.
But,
Do it.
yeah, you never know.
You never know. It's great. Kit,
Hey,
anything else?
I was in Italy. I did a concert in Florence one time,
Oh,
and
cool.
for the encore, I just spontaneously did like "O Sole Mio,"
Mm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Elvis did as now it's now or never, and
Right.
the next time I went to Italy, I was getting requests for it, and I'd never actually done an arrangement of it. It was just something that I just launched into, and that happened.
Mm.
Same thing happened with my version of Little Wing. I mean, I played it one time because somebody said, "Oh, play Little Wing," and it was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool," and I just kept playing it. I never actually took the time to do a proper arrangement of it. It's just, okay, I'll play it again, and now it's a fixture of my live shows for 30 years. So
Wow.
you never know.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah,
Glad
you
you-
never know. Kit?
Glad you put that
Mm.
bug in Lawrence's ear there. That's
Yeah.
great. Good going, Tom.
Yeah.
Another question about the 2011 session. You mentioned Brett McKenzie, who of course is one half of Flight of the Conchords, who produced those sessions. I just wondered what was it like working with him?
He seemed quite creative. I was not familiar with his stuff, with the Flight of the Conchords stuff, but
Mm.
when you're in a studio situation, I mean, you have this kind of direct relationship between the producer and, in his case, kind of the arranger too, and the music, and you have a limited amount of time to basically to establish a creative rapport. So it just it's all about the music ultimately. A quick story. When we were recording music for Dirty Dancing, there was Time of My Life and there was She's Like the Wind. The third single from that album was a Mary Clayton song called Yes.
Yeah.
And we recorded, and Gene Page did the arrangement. Now, Gene Page was like, had arranged a lot of the great Motown stuff. I mean, he was really one of the great kind of R&B soul arrangers.
Sure.
And we recorded it with him in the room, so he was kind of conducting it. We did a version of it, which everybody loved, and he left. And then the producer said, can we do one more take? So we did one more take. It felt completely different because Gene Page's energy wasn't directing it, wasn't in the room. And so you really, it's the personality side of it is such an important factor as to how what the outcome is, what people expect, what the creative person is listening for, is looking for.
Gosh, you're on the Dirty Dancing soundtrack too. Okay, I think we're going to have you back to talk about that. You're on every album that I listened to growing up. This is incredible. Not that I'm surprised, but amazing. And oh, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just saying. Well, we were all at the New York Fest, and we enjoyed your performances. So much. You helped celebrate the 45th anniversary of Back to the Egg. We had a nice little tribute of Denny Lane. Can you just talk briefly about, or to maybe tell a story you haven't told in a while about Denny, about working with Denny?
Well, the first time I worked with Denny was in September of 1977 when I was playing in the house band on David Esse's TV show. And we did Go Now, and I played a guitar solo on it. And I had never seen the performance because when you're in that studio situation, you're not on camera. It's an off-camera band. And it showed up not long after Denny had passed.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
Showed up on YouTube. Right. And so I'm watching it, and right at the point where I launch into the guitar solo, Denny smiles, that kind of sideways smile that he had. And it was like, that was the moment that my life changed. Because that was, and then a couple of days later, he had called the musical director for the show, and he said, is he versatile? And then I ran into him a few months later with Paul and Ender at Air Studios, and I got introduced. And then, but it wasn't until April of 78, while I was working at Abbey Road, I was in Studio 2 when I got a phone call from MPL, from McCartney's management, and I went up into the control room. I'd never been in the control room. I'd always worked in the studio, but the musicians stayed down on the floor, and went up the staircase and through the control room to get to the phone because there were no cell phones back then. And that was when I got the call that Denny wants to know if you can come and jam on Monday. And oh, by the way, Paul and Linda will be there. But that was the progression, it was working with Denny. But seeing that video and realizing that he was responding to what I was doing was kind of a revelation.
Wow, amazing. You talked about your new album. You talk about that for a few minutes. It's available now. You said LP, CD, streaming.
Yes. I couldn't decide whether to call it A Day in the Life or In My Life. So I called it A Day in My Life. Because exactly what it was. It was a day in Abbey Road Studio 2, and Hope was producing because she, it was her idea originally for me to do albums of Beatle stuff because she's a huge Beatle fan and she's a huge fan of my acoustic playing, and so she would listen to me playing tunes all the time, and she'd say, "Well, play a Beatles song," And so originally I did In My Life. Before I even started doing solo acoustic records, I had the arrangement of In My Life, an arrangement of Martha My Dear. And we did, for my Mosaic album, I did a kind of a tone poem version of Rain that I also did re-recorded for this album. And the idea, I think, was to do a dozen of my Beatle arrangements that would be a kind of a representative sample, including some of my favorite ones, like Strawberry Fields Forever, for example, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And I really have been enjoying playing Honey Pie because I I get to jam a bit on that one.
Mhm.
And A Day in the Life, and um, it was just a very productive day, and the fact that I'm in Studio 2, and that's a magical place. I mean, it's not just because the Beatles recorded there. There is something about that room. I'm convinced there's like an intersection of ley lines or some kind of voodoo thing to it, because there's just a vibe about it.
Hmm.
And and there are great studios, and Capitol is one. What is now East West used to be Western. Um, I used to work at Trident. I used to work at Olympic. I mean, and the great rooms have a vibe about them, but there's something transcendent about Abbey Road Studio 2. And
Oh,
and
amazing.
the fact that all that Beetlejuice kind of soaked into the woodwork.
Right. And you're also touring as well? Or
I
going to
am. I
be?
mean, I do kind of guerrilla tours. I don't just go
Mm.
out on the road for months at a time. I do, like I've got starting August, whenever it is, 1st, I think. I've got dates in, hang on, I have to look at my website to see. Oh no, I actually have a calendar. What am I talking about?
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm playing August 1st in Wakefield, Rhode Island, Pump House Music Works. And then John Monteleone, who's really like probably the greatest luthier for archtop guitars, has a festival in Stony Point, Long Island. Then I'm in Chester on the 3rd, and then Cafe Lena in Saratoga Springs on the 4th. Then I have to come home so I can go to Chicago for the Beatles Fest.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but I mentioned earlier, later in the year, in October 9th, I'll be in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, at Jimmy's Jazz and Blues Club. And that's not, I am playing solo, but that'll also be with my Airfoil band, with Jeff Allen Ross. And that's a benefit for Crossroads House, which is a charity. So, and that's just a one-off gig. We're just flying in.
Okay.
And it's just best thing to do is just to check my website.
Mhm.
I'm starting to use Bands in Town
Mm.
as a resource. And in fact, I have a mailing list, but I'm about to port that over to Bands in Town, because that's a good way of keeping track of the gigs.
Thank you very much, LJ. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And Kit and I will see you in Chicago.
Yes, we will.
Lovely. Well, I look forward to seeing you.
Mm.
Not sure when I'm going to be back in Manhattan next time, Ken. You're there, right? You still in Manhattan?
I'm in Connecticut,
Oh, you're in Connecticut. Oh, so you're going to maybe come to the Chester.
right?
Good. Well, I hope to see you there.
I will definitely make it there.
And I have been doing a lot more stuff around LA recently, because I've been really enjoying getting out and playing electric guitar. And between working with T-Bear, and there's this band called The Tribe that is kind of a collective. This Saturday we're doing a show of 70s California sound stuff, so Jackson Browne tunes and things. And Rosemary Butler's singing with us, who used to sing with Jackson. And it's kind of been good for me as a musician to get back into playing ensemble stuff rather than strictly doing the solo guitar thing.
Sure.
Okay. Cool.
So
Very cool.
there you go. Well, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Sorry I
Lawrence.
have
you
to
Really
very much.
appreciate it. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Right.
Yeah, the dogs are not going to be happy if they don't get their walk.
No, well, we understand. Totally
We get
understand.
it.
Thank you.
All right
Thank
then.
you.
Take care, LJ.
Thank
Thank
you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well,
Great.
that was LJ, and we got to talk a little about Rainbow Connection and what he's been doing now, and then obviously BJ Kramer. Thank you, Ken, for bringing that up, because I still need to listen to that the album, the song, the main song, the video. What was the name of the main
With
song?
Me. Well, Are You With Me is the name of the album.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right.
And the song for Brian Epstein, if you want to go and look at the video, is "I Couldn't Have Done It
Mhm.
Without."
Yes.
Okay. I
It's
couldn't
a
have done it
great
without you,
video.
right.
What, yeah,
And
see, yeah,
speaking of
just,
Brian, Epstein, I mean the trailer for that movie that's coming out, Midas Man, dropped today, so you can see the trailer now.
Oh, nice.
yeah. And I think it looks
Yeah.
actually very interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And I can be a little skeptical when it comes
Oh yeah.
to biographies, but this actually looks interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Okay. All right.
So thanks
Excellent.
for watching.
Yes.
Yeah. And for Ken, Kit, I'm Tom. And as always, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. This was just a quick little bonus episode that we were able to partake in. And thank you all for watching. Don't forget to don't forget to subscribe to Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast, to things we said today. Check out Kit on Toppermost of the Poppermost, and don't forget to check out my other show, Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. And don't forget to check out Joe Mayo. Joe Mayo didn't join us here, but check out his channel, Mean Mr. Mayo. Okay, so that's going to do it for us, and we'll see you next Monday to talk about the Mind Games box set. Right, we're going to review that.
We're going to break that
So
down.
that should be, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so take care, everyone.
Here's to the lovers, the dreamers, and you.
Very
There
good.
you go. Very good. Love it.
Bye.
Take care.